Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here in this incredible event. Today, we're going to be revising the spotlight on health, women in global health leadership. Despite making the majority of global health force, women still remain vastly underrepresented in leadership and decision-making roles. This gap is just a reflection, is not just a reflection of inequality, is a missed opportunity for better health, a stronger institution, and more effective leadership and diplomacy. When women are absent from this leadership, entire perspective, knowledge are left out of the conversation and off the table. And when they lead health system, that's a proven fact, let health system respond more fairly, more fully, and more efficiently. I want to walk you a little bit of why this matter, the challenges that persist, and why we must act now. Leaderships that include women's leads to more inclusive policies, ones that address the real needs of diverse communities. Health systems led by women are often more resilient, more trusted, and more community-focused. Representation in leadership roles matter because women are seen in leadership. It opens the doors also to other women to help the long-standing barriers that we see. Women's in leaderships and in diplomacy often bring a really collaborative, solution-oriented process in global health. And we have seen this, the role that has been played, especially during COVID-19 responses. Vaccine rollout strategies or advocacy were under prioritized issues, and women had led decisively and effectively decisions and policy implementation. Progress is slow, is there, but is uneven. Women continue to be continued out of top roles, even when they are just as more qualified as male peers. The hiring process often comes at double standards, and sometimes men are judged more on the potential side, and women have to prove even in more their experience. The system is still require more support, more network, more mentorship, and other kind of flexibility in terms of the work and life balance. And in global health space, especially in international forum, we still see women struggling to be heard, respect, and be safe in a safe environment. But despite that, we are still in a critical turning point. Gender equality in leaderships is getting attention, not the attention that is required, but is getting attention. And health leadership must reflect the people who power it. 70% of the healthcare workers are female. And today's global challenges, from pandemic, climate change related threats and issues, demand leadership, and women should be at the front of that. And it's not about women's issue, it's a leadership issue, it's a global health issue, and that's why we are here to analyze the report of this spotlight on health. And for that, I will pass the floor to who's going to be our moderator, Ms. Joy Phumaphi.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you, and again, welcome everyone. We are really at this important event to share ideas, but also to get some energy and drive to go and do something, wherever we are, whatever hat you are wearing. So my name is Joy Phumaphi. I'm from Botswana, and I have worn many hats over the years, but one hat that I'm very proud to be wearing now, I am the chair of the National Gender Commission of Botswana. One other hat that I'm proud to wear is that I'm a grandmother, but this one. But I would like to present to you a team of very, very experienced and knowledgeable panelists. We have Helen former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and former head of UNDP. She was a former minister and a former member of parliament, and the chair of the PMNCH board, and numerous global commissions and initiatives, but essentially a global leader in development. And we are really honored that she is one of the founders of Women in Global Health Leadership. We also have, let's give Helen a hand, please. We also have Dr. Flavia Bustreo. She's the vice chair of Foundation Botna and chair of the Governance and Ethics Committee of the Partnership on Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, and co-chair of the Lancet Commission on Gender-Based Violence. That is where she really demonstrated her skill, but again, decades of experience in development. You're welcome, Flavia. And we have, of course, Revati. I don't know where she is. Oh, there you are. She's the director of the UN University Institute for Global Health, and has worked with Save the Children and Global Director for Health and Nutrition, and has led numerous international research projects. So we are very, very privileged to have here as a leading researcher in this area. And of course, we have our fearless Executive Director of the PMNCH Partnership, Rajat Khosla, former Director of the Institute of Global Health, and who has worked and advised numerous UN agencies as well in this area. But I would like to hand the floor over now to our fearless leader, Helen.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you everyone for coming. I recognise the permanent representative from Spain, especially because he used to be ambassador to New Zealand. So there are many connections in this room. And this event sort of comes about sponsored by GWL and PMNCH because, well, I'm a founder of GWL and the chair of PMNCH. And when GWL said, who could help us get a function in Geneva? I said, well, as a matter of fact, maybe PMNCH with its strong commitment to women's health could host. So here we are today. Flavia is going to speak in more detail to the study that we've got to present on the woeful position of women in positions in the global health system. And I must say, every time I see a photo, and you do occasionally, of the heads of global health organisations, and maybe you've got the head of UNICEF, and maybe you've got the head of UNFPA, but other than that, it's you know, we're not there, and yet, as we know, women do dominate the health workforce. We are actually larger users of the health system than men, because we, in the course of the sexual and reproductive life of most women, they're in when they're well women as well, and also because of often the primary care for children and relatives who are aged or have other illnesses, disabilities. So we have a lot to do with the health system, but our voice has not been as prominent as it should be. So Flavia can speak more to this, but we thought it might be useful in this setting just to talk a little bit about why Global Women Leaders Voices for Inclusion was set up. And it came after the last Secretary General contest, which was in 2016, where you might recall there was quite a campaign for a woman SG, and the majority of the candidates for the position of Secretary General were women. But yet again, it was not to be. And by the way, we're in the cycle again now. Next year, the UN will choose a new Secretary General, and there are strong women coming forward. And we really are running a sort of #HerTurn campaign to see if we can get a woman up into that position. And it's not going to be easy for reasons I'll allude to. So all the women who ran in 2016 obviously were unsuccessful. And then just after all that was decided, the US election put President Trump in power for his first iteration. And that brought forward a lot of the concerns that we have at this time as to what leadership in a major country like the US does on issues of women's health, sexual and reproductive health, the rights of women, and so on. And even since that first presidency, the anti-rights movement, which so badly affects women and girls, and the whole SRHR agenda has, of course, got a lot of traction. And three of us who had been candidates for Secretary General, that was Susana Malcorra of Argentina, who was foreign minister at the time, Irina Bokova, who had been head of UNESCO, did a 10-year stint there, and we came together and we said, you know, we need senior women with experience in the multilateral system to start rallying for the UN to continue to play the critical role it has played on gender equality. And if you look at the history of the UN, and there is a very substantial set of volumes on this, the summary volume lists 10 things that have been major contributions to the UN. And one of them is the normative framework around the rights of women, you know, the Convention on the Rights of Women. And of course, the institutions associated with that, the CSW held each year in New York, obviously eventually the founding of UN Women, UNFPA is a sexual and reproductive health focused agency. You know, these things all need support, the institutions and the normative framework, and they're at risk where you have a powerful member state that starts to rally an anti-rights agenda. This was really our concern. And so we set up the network and we began to cast our minds for women who had been in senior positions, and a lot came forward. We have dozens of members, and the perspective that I was also able to bring was to bring women from the health, like Flavia and others, health and development spheres. Susana, of course, had connections across the peacekeeping, the Secretariat, political affairs, and arena out of the UNESCO and her foreign ministry background connections as well. So that's us in Madrid, actually. We had a wonderful meeting in Madrid at the start of last year, the first in-person meeting, trying to set an agenda around the issues. So that's where we came from. And then the organisation was successful in attracting foundation funding and began compiling the evidence on the woeful lack of representation of women in the multilateral system. What you see today on the global health positions is a subset of that, but across the multilateral system, women have not had a fair share of the posts and the senior positions since the foundation of the organisation. And as I said, we're coming up next year to the election of a new Secretary General. There are men lining up, but there are most certainly women lining up, and we are batting for a good field of women, not to cut each other up, but to actually see who can emerge with support. So that's just to sensitise you to the campaign. We often also speak up where we see a significant position coming up where a woman could have a go. The World Bank, for example, went to a man again. IMF has done better, 2 women leaders. We commented recently on the selection of Laura Gil, Ambassador Laura Gil of Colombia, who has been elected as the Deputy Secretary General of the OAS. I think this is a first also. But we're really there to be a voice for seeing women step up to these highest positions. So that's enough from me, and I'll hand back to our moderator to take the session forward.
Thank you so much, Helen. I would like to invite Flavia to present the findings of the Spotlight.
Thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to be here at WHO, where I had the distinct pleasure to be Assistant Director General for Family, Women and Children Health for almost 8 years. I wear that badge of honor also very proudly. Now, as Helen explained, now I'm a proud member of Global Women Leader Voices. And when we discussed, we sat in fact in that meeting in Madrid, we discussed overall the role of women in multilateralism, we thought it would be important to look at specific sector and do that year by year, so that this provides the evidence, the knowledge, and like you said, Joy, at the beginning, stimulates people to do something about it, not just to know about the situation, but also to address. So this year we have done, with the help of Susanna Latimaki that is there, Nina Shalve that is arriving sometime after 12:30. We have co-conspired with them to do what we call the spotlight. This is the little booklet that you have in front of you that we are presenting today. And it's a simple analysis, if you wish. We didn't have ambitions to do large studies, but we just wanted to document it very simply, the state of affairs. We looked at, we did a review of the organizational policy also to try and understand what justifies, what explains these states of affairs. We did an analysis of the leadership composition, current, but also, as you will see, we went back to the origin of these institutions in global health. Because often time people say, okay, well, there has been a woman leading these, current, for example, there has been a woman leading the regional office of Africa for 10 years. Now, okay, tick, let's change, let's go back. But that was the only time that a woman ever led over the history. So we think that that is important to look at the analysis of the leadership composition over time. We also did interviews with women leaders like Joy, like the leaders in global health that have been experiencing their career, their attempts, and what they found. And also we did an online survey, and I thanks all the ones that not only here with us today, but also online that are following, that have given us input. And of course, as any scientific work you do, you also, of course, look at the literature review, you identify the drivers of gender imbalance and the enablers for leadership with a focus on global health. So I'll present very briefly, if you get the next one, maybe just to say one more word before, and you said it already. This is just Katherine putting in a slide what you said at the beginning. And this is a paper that we have to appreciate from the BMJ editor here at Jocelyn. Thank you so much for giving this space to different people to write. It's a paper that appeared actually this year that explains why women leadership in global health is important. It's not just because we want to have equality, but there is also, it improves financial performance, it drives innovation, it creates an organizational culture and climate, it engages with ethical and sustainable initiatives, it improves women's health, and it brings up other women's careers and aspirations. So this is not us saying that, this is an article published in the BMJ, but I wanted to say that to explain the rationale why we are doing this. So coming to our spotlight, so this is, I hope you can see it, but if you cannot see it very well, you can see the at page 6 of the booklet. So these are the organization we looked at that includes the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization regional offices, because explaining it here in the WHO makes me a little bit smile, but most of you know that the organization has an elected leader, who is the Director General, but also has other elected leaders who are the regional directors. And when you look at leadership in global health, those elected leaders, they actually have played a tremendous role, and they continue to play a tremendous role. We also looked at the World Bank. As you know, for decades, the World Bank has invested significantly in health. We looked, of course, at other financing instruments that are so crucial for health, namely the Global Fund and the Gavi. We limited ourselves to this because we felt that those were the energy we had. There are many other entities that are important, but we felt that it was good to do a good job on these institutions and do an analysis rather than do a more comprehensive analysis of many other institutions. So what you see in light orange is all the years that those institutions were led by men, And what you see in darker orange are the years when these institutions were led by women. And if you do a summary over time, you end up with a number that is, in my own country, Italy, is not a very lucky number, is 17% of the time women were in position of leadership across the organization, 13 out of 78. So there is a trend, if you go back to the previous slide, there is a trend, if you can see, there is a trend in the recent decades to an increase possibility for women to be leader, but notably, for example, the Gavi has had a woman leader only from last year. The Global Fund has never had a woman at the leadership. And I would also say, for the colleagues that work with a financing institution, the World Bank has had a woman leading the health, nutrition, and population only a couple of years, and I know her very well. She was actually coming from the education sector. Joy had the distinct pleasure to be leading the institution overall network, health, nutrition, and education, but for the health investments leadership, that's where the female leadership has been absent. We can go to the next. Now, we wanted to try and, through the interview that we made, have a sense of what are the barriers that hinder women leadership in global health. And this, I'm sure, will not surprise the people that are here in the room. I know that many of you have been working in this field. So there are, of course, societal barriers, organizational barriers, and individual barriers that are of notice. The societal barriers are barriers at large, which are norms and stereotypes that portray women as less assertive and less competent than men in leadership. In our interviews, and Susanna maybe during the conversation come in and add some of the color, during some of the interviews, it was quite interesting to hear from some of our colleagues that have been in leadership role that have explained, when I was in leadership position, if I was assertive, I would be called aggressive. And instead, if a man was assertive, he would be called a leader. So these are societal barriers that qualifies and represent how women lead and in general tend to portray women less competent in the leadership quality. There are, of course, organizational barriers, and those also emerge quite significantly from the leaders that we interviewed, because there is gender bias in hiring, but it's not just the hiring, it's the promotion and the evaluation practices and the career progression that often leads to women not being in the pool of the candidate that can finally arrive at the top leadership. And of course, there is, in the institution we looked, there has been attempted to improve, but there is generally limited support to parental leave and flexible working arrangement, and that penalizes especially women. And this is the thing that is most painful. There is still, including in these organizations that are supposed to be the leaders in health, some of the interviews highlight the toxic workplace behaviors and some of the harassment that the women, that leaders experience themselves during their work. And especially in the recent years, over the internet, over the social media, over the interaction, the virtual interaction that many of us engages with. And finally, there are individual barriers that are the norms that within the organization are institutionalized and somehow erode the confidence for women to come forward as candidates, because you don't see other women in the leadership of those organizations. There are not so many structured networks and mentors and networks that can facilitate that leadership. And as Helen mentioned in her comments, when you do seek leadership position, there isn't really a network that supports you. And that's also one thing that we are trying to address. How do we address that? So I think at this point I'm supposed to pass the baton to you, Joy, right? To see what can we do about it.
Oops. Thanks a lot, Flavia. You know, of course, when you look at something like this, particularly when you work in various aspects that you feel are not gender related, you might think that, okay, maybe there is very little I can do, but I can assure you each one of you is working in an area that is gender related. There isn't a single one who isn't, unless if you are on an island somewhere which has only got one gender. So gender parity policies do exist in some organizations, but what you can do is make sure that these policies actually enforce the gender equity as being fundamental to the success of the organization. Because sometimes people make it seem as if it's an add-on and it's all for show so that you can be declared gender sensitive. But you have to clearly communicate that it is actually important for the efficient running of the organization and for improving the impact, and that it results in a meaningful change, and that broader organizational support will actually make the organization even more successful. And you also need to look at how you influence the political orientation of the organization. Politics is not just about people who stand for elected office, but politics is about influence. How you influence the policy makers, the decision makers, regardless of where they are. So build allies in your workplace, across genders, across generations. Use existing structures. You'll find in a lot of our organizations there are youth, there are groups that are focusing on financial literacy, how to invest better. Use those fora to actually push the gender message, to leverage the power of women in order to drive the action that is required. So our belief is that there is nothing that you cannot do. Network. And sometimes when we develop networks, people think that the network should only be women empowerment or something like that. But these networks are for productivity. So if you are using half of your brain power, you are less productive. So this is really some of the actions that we can take. Flavia, I think this was actually supposed to be you, but we also would like you to organize politically, of course, because I come from a country where after decades and decades of independence, we have only 6 women in parliament. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's it. And when I was a member of parliament, there were only 6 women in parliament. So there's been no improvement. And we, even though women, if you look at our financial institutions, most of them are led by women across the board in the private sector. So it's not that women are not capable, but women have been victimized to such an extent. Whenever they rear their heads, they are knocked down to such an extent that they now do not want to compete. So this mobilizing of women is extremely important. I think, Flavia, if you don't want to add anything, we could open the floor. Mm-hmm. Okay. So So if are there any comments, please feel free, modify, include, expand, build on what has already been presented. And I'm sure whether you are sitting around the table or behind is still welcome. Please introduce yourself and then make your comment.
Hello, I'm Abhishek Bhatia. I'm from the Health Diplomacy Alliance. And I was just going around the room right now just to count the number of men and women in the room. And I usually do that. I was at one of the launches of the Women in Global Health chapter also, and I did that at that time. There were just 2 men in the room. Right now, when you count, there's just 8 men in the room. And just 2 quick questions. So one is, so from your experience and from your example, when women have entered into leadership positions, what did the path to leadership for them look like? And second, what is the role of men in this entire conversation when you look at changing of organizational policies, mindsets, or these biases? And how is it that you've looked at it? Those are the 2 questions. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to have a go at that, Joy?
Yes, please.
I think the path is different for women in elected positions as against in the big organisations. And Joy giving the example of Botswana having 6 women members, these decades and decades after independence and Botswana having its own parliament, kind of speaks to the deep sort of stereotypes about who is a politician, and at the moment the stereotype is not that a woman is a politician in Botswana, but it's men. And I think in a lot of countries, that's still the case, unfortunately. And I often tell the story of when I was first elected to Parliament in 1981 in New Zealand. The Parliament was 92 members in size, and the numbers of women doubled from 4 to 8 at the 1981 election. So we were a sort of pathetic little minority of under 9%. And there really were so few role models. And we became the role models. We were the baby boomer generation who became the role models. And then those who came after us, like Jacinda Ardern, who became Prime Minister of New Zealand some years after I had been Prime Minister, they say we stood on the shoulders of people like Helen, but we also stood on the shoulders of some of the very few women who had been able to break through. So you definitely needed male allyship. You couldn't have got to the position without that. And you needed a movement from women in the society that said, why shouldn't women do this job? And then eventually you produce enough role models that more women step up. I have no doubt New Zealand will have another woman Prime Minister, more and more, but it will alternate between men and women. But we are well established in that, but we've had to change a lot of the the norms and stereotypes about who can lead. And women leaders still run into different kinds of issues. I mean, for example, there's an element of the population that is obsessed with whether women have children, and if you don't, which I never had children, how could you possibly understand the pressures on a family? And then if you had a child like Jacinda did, the critics labelled her a part-time Prime Minister because she had a child. I mean, poor woman was working 20 hours a day, but that was beside the point. So it's kind of different issues, but I think if we come to the organisations, now let me distinguish here too. You have the ones which are elected by the member states. And WHO, to be fair to World Health Assembly, twice it has elected women leaders. Grow, very strong personality, still battling, fighting to this day. And then Margaret Chan, also very, very strong personality. So, maybe there's something in the health community which has perceived that women's leadership is, very appropriate here. At the level of the UN, this is very challenging because, in effect, the selection for the UN Secretary General is made by the permanent 5 members. Because to be Secretary General, you have to have no one veto you. Now, I should perhaps say with pride, I was vetoed by 3 countries. But all of us were vetoed. All the women got vetoes. And I think we terrified them. You know, it's the stereotypes about strong women. I remember going to one very prominent ambassador, and he said, "Helen, your strength is your weakness." Because you have Secretary General's 2 words. Some want you down the secretary end, not the general end. And so when you have a woman who's more at the general end, this is terrifying to some countries and to some, people in position to call the shots. So I think, I was talking to someone who's an aspirant for the position the other day, and I said, you can't pretend to be something you're not, but on the other hand, you have to appear to be able to do the job without intimidating them. Or thinking that you might somehow go rogue or whatever. I mean, it's very, very, very difficult. Security Council, I think, for the most part, like a quiet life in the Permanent Five, not someone who rocked the boat. And women are seen as, they can't quite manage them. The bloke's sort of more clubbable. Maybe you can deal with them more, but these women might have minds of their own. They could be quite dangerous. So, we're all batting hard for a woman Secretary General. It's usually believed that it's Latin America and the Caribbean's turn, which I believe it is. They have not had a Secretary General since Javier Pérez de Cuellar from Peru, which was decades ago, 34 years ago, I think. And I know that in the Latin American Caribbean community, you have the most phenomenal women diplomats and also former heads of state. So somewhere there, hopefully, there's someone who can rise through. But it's not easy because the strength thing. Now, then if you come to the senior managers, which are appointed positions, I think as Joy and Flavia have said, there are hiring and promotion issues. And when I was at the UN, Ban Ki-moon, interesting, Ban Ki-moon was in many ways a quintessentially conservative Korean male, but he really believed in promoting women. And he really was very, very supportive of us as women in the UN. And he set down rules around hiring, which we all followed. And those rules made it clear that there had to be women in long lists, that the committees that looked at who went on the long list had to have women on them, had to be women on the short lists who were interviewed, women on the interviewing panel. And then when you sent a senior position recommendation over to Ban Ki-moon, he wouldn't accept a list of men. You had to have women put before him for consideration. So, a very proactive approach like that can make a difference because it means that women actually get to be considered. That's the challenge, to get on the list to be considered rather than blocked at an earlier point. So those would be some of my reflections.
Thank you so much. This is very, very informative. Revati, as a renowned researcher in women's issues and women's health, what would be your reaction to this report, to the findings?
Thank you, Joy, and thank you for this invitation to contribute to this important discussion. I think, first of all, I would like to begin with congratulating GWL and the team, in really articulating so well not just the challenges, that women are facing in getting into leadership positions, but also offering the responses. I think that is really, really critical. And for calling out the need to dismantle, some of these discriminatory structures of power, both visible and invisible. I think the report has done a fantastic job in bringing out, these elements quite well. What stood out to me, I have to say, is the appalling speed at which, we are making progress, and or the lack thereof, and also the fragility that we are dealing with, everything that's happening around us, and in this, how do we then drive and push back against the backlash that we are seeing, for women's health and all the other discussions ongoing. What really impressed me was the consistency with which these organizations keep doing the same thing. I think it's really impressive that, if after all these discussions, people calling out for it, people requesting it, it continues. So I think the urgency for the need to achieve this at scale and the speed at which we need to move is something that we will advocate for. But also recognizing that we're not going to get there with top-down solutions. It really has to come, scale and bottom-up as well. And also, the organizational culture is far more important, than the policies that are being, because there may be quite a, deviation from what is written down in terms of ambition, but what is being implemented, and we've seen that because you've also looked at some of the policy documents when you looked at the report. And I really like what you said, Joy, that we need to walk the talk. And I think many of the people sitting in the room are doing that, including IIGH, really making that difference on, everything that we can do individually. But also internalizing and institutionalizing feminist leadership. We're not going to get there if we try to do this as a special initiative, if we try to do this as, something that we advocate for. And I will end with three things. The first is, of course, the greater need for transparency. And, efforts like these are fantastic in bringing that out, because reality could often deflect from planned ambitions. Second is, of course, to strengthen the accountability and have tracking of the progress publicly. Because the more you do it, the more visibility, the more you socialize. Look at the room. Some of us are usual suspects in this conversation, as the colleague pointed out. The disbalance in the men recommended, but really move away from the tokenistic leadership that we are doing, right? Because often women will see that. So we should go for substantive women's leadership rather than symbolic leadership. So really minding against that. And then, of course, my last point will be to leverage male allies. We do have them, but I think we just need to increase the numbers and bring them on board and put them in the front. Put them on the spot, I would say, to advocate for us. Thank you.
Thank you. So on putting men on the spot, Rajat, what would be your take,
Thanks for that, Joy. And I'm one of those who has ridden on the shoulders of giants, and I'm sitting between the three of them, two of whom have been my present and former bosses. So I say with great pride and reflection about the issues that we are talking about. A couple of years ago, Flavia and I, with our Colsec and others, wrote a paper about why does global health continue to deny gender equality. And the key finding that we landed with is the interplay between misogyny, sexism, and patriarchy, which continues to drive the institutions, the agenda setting, and what we do and what we don't do about it. It is rather appalling that in 2025, our discussion is still about parity. Jocelyn interviewed me when she was writing the paper for the BMJ, and I think my whole point of a departure was how embarrassing it is that we are still having to make the case in 2025 that this is an important thing to do. And I am embarrassed for the system. The report is outstanding, and congratulations to GWL Voices and everybody else who worked on it. But where we all knew it. Anybody I worked in this institution previously for 10 years, myself before I left, and I'm now back with the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. But we know the problem. Flavia, when she was ADG, constituted a working group to look at what were the issues, the challenges that were being addressed. And the problem is that when you do look at the configuration of G staff, the P2, P3 configuration, you do find a level of parity when you look at women in those roles. But somehow women are never promoted into senior roles. Somehow when it comes to P5 and above, you see this graph completely getting skewed down. We need to ask the question, what is happening in these institutions that women who have worked for that long period of time still don't get to be in the leadership roles? And if you just look at, right now it's a different conversation in WHO, but if you did look at the breakdowns, you will find that that it is very much skewed in terms of one particular gender as against the other. The other challenge, and I do want to, problematize it a little bit, if you do look at who do end up in those roles, who are they? Because there is a system of power and privilege that we do need to confront, because we are not getting, the women in all their diversity from the variety of settings to be in those leadership roles. And that's a big challenge, and which comes to one of the things that I wanted to say in terms of, not really recommendations, what we need to do, what I need to do in the role I'm in with the partnership. What are we doing to incentivize women to take in these roles, to create that incentive to join, STEM fields, to actually then rise through the ranks? We have very little. I've had the pleasure of sitting on a quad fellowship scheme run by Japan, and it was still stunning that how few applications for STEM fellowships which were coming out were from women scientists in those things. And so I think we cannot solve it by only looking at the top end of the problem. We need to see where the problem is arising from and why. And there are small little things. And a funny anecdote to this is, a previous version of this flyer had me as Miss Rajat Khosla. But that was important because it started a whole conversation in social media about the importance of titles, as to how men always have their professors and their doctorships and their gender identified. Women never even get called, that they actually are equally qualified. They have the same PhDs, they have the same doctorates. Why is that actually taken as a given? And there is a whole back and forth happening with people. And actually, I thought that was remarkable, that even a small little thing can spark a debate which we often tend to ignore. Years back, I did have a chance to engage with Sarita Batliwala, who with CREA was doing the work on identifying why does feminist leadership matter. And feminist leadership, it's not just about achieving parity. Of course, parity is important, but it is about the values that leadership brings into the system. It is about shared leadership. It is about empathy. It is about recognizing the lived realities, which unfortunately we don't capture in the systems that we are in. The paper talks about returns on investment and what we are set to achieve if we do that. I do actually want to stop by saying, I think the question we should be saying, if not now, when are we going to change this conversation? And I think every one of us have a positionality from which we speak, and that change starts from here. Because I think policies are there in this institution and all the institutions, Flavia, that are on page 6. They don't get implemented, and there are loopholes found. Of course, you have to go with merit eventually, as if there was not meritorious women candidates to be appointed from. So I do think that positionality has to give way to intentionality now to see the change that we want to achieve. So thank you really for doing this and bringing us all together.
Thank you, Rajat, and thank you so much, Revati. Again, I'm opening the floor. So are there any other comments before we go back to our panelists? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Joshua. I'm a member of County Assembly from Trans Nzoia, Kenya. First, I would like to applaud the team for putting up the report. One area that's got on my mind is about what the chair just said, talked about, where do we begin? When you're looking at especially scientific, mathematics, science, and technology, most of the women do not tend to shy away from that sector, and that sector makes a lot of sense in terms of leadership. Talking about that, I've seen the documents about mentorship. Most women, especially in Africa and Kenya in particular, lack mentorship. And in 2017, in my parliament, we only had 2 women. And those that won, they went out and really talked to fellow women. Right now, from 2, we've increased to almost 13 members of a county assembly being women, because of the 2 went out and mentored other women. And number 3 is how do you begin? It's about making sure that men are sensitive about issues. when I won the election in 2023, then I was proposed to be the chair of health. But thinking about women actually handle a lot of matters to do with health, I had to resign from being a chair, and I took the vice chair. So I had to propose a woman to take up the leadership, because with them they really handle matters to do with health. So to me, it's about how do you relate and how do you make men more sensitive about issues that women articulate very well, more than women. So those are kind of areas I've put in about, particularly about mentorship. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very useful, please.
Thanks. Congratulations on the report. My name is Jocelyn Clark, and I want to reflect on one thing I think that's really positive about where we are right now. But first, I want to dwell just a moment in the negative. I mean, I'm delighted to see more data on the issue because it helps our advocacy, doesn't it? But many of us here will have been working on this issue for a long time, sticking our necks out, using our available platforms, volunteering our time to try to move the needle. And the progress is so poorly that I have to say, when you quoted some of the accounts, Flavia and Nina, from the interviews, it really made my heart sink, because it just feels so familiar, and it's extremely diminishing and depressing as a woman. And of course, the path forward feels even more daunting, doesn't it? Because it's not like it was even in the middle of 2024, where we were feeling like we were having conversations that were authentic and being well received, and in good faith, people were supporting us in advancing women's equal opportunities. Now we've got all these forces against us that are literally wiping out space for us to be talking about equity and inclusion and diversity, because of the US kind of anti-DEI backlash. So now it's like we're not even going to be in comfortable spaces having these conversations. We're going to be fighting against something that, I mean, in my lifetime, I've never experienced that before. But I suppose for the younger people in the audience, I would want us to just be extremely mindful about our language. These are not issues that are women's fault and need to be fixed within women. These are systemic issues for which those who have and hold positions of authority and power must be, as you said, Ravita, held to account. I mean, these are, the competencies associated with inclusive leadership, which is required for the change we need in the world. These demand there to be equal, fair workplaces that are free of discrimination, free of harassment. Women experience abuse and harassment at far, far greater levels than men. And institutional leaders must be held to account. Their contracts should not be renewed, for example, is something I always advocate for, if they don't display an ability to create a fair workplace. So I just want to really emphasize that. And I think even when we talk about engaging men as allies, that the responsibility and accountability does lie with folks who hold power, many times unearned advantages associated with the power and privilege. Rajat just mentioned that. But can I land just on one thing I want to reflect upon that's very, very positive, and Helen reminded me of this in her opening remarks. I think we're at like a 2.0 or 3.0 part of our little Women in Global Health Leadership movement, which is we're really demonstrating a range of capable women candidates for any available position. And I think that's important because we were just having this conversation last night with the Global Health 50/50 people who also track. Some of us serve on their board. And a couple of years ago, their report was looking at board membership of all the big global health organizations, 200 of them in the world. A mere 1% of those board seats are held by women from a low or middle income country. I mean, it's just shocking. So that alone is worth actioning, but actually the reality is that amounts to about 20 women. No, sorry. That amounts to 20 board seats, but 11 women. And so it's the same, and here I'm not just, I don't want to just surface the issue about women from low and middle income countries or women of color who a very few number of them are being elevated and then leaned on or drawn upon repeatedly. I think that we have a tendency to see the same type of women if they do occupy that 5 or 10% of an organization, the same women. But what I really honestly think we're seeing now is the ways in which our movement is showing and broadcasting to the world that there is such a diversity of experience and qualification. And I think it's very smart that you're not backing, for example, individual women for certain positions, but we're saying, listen, fit for what your organization or the world needs, there are going to be a range of available women, and it's your job, not ours, your job as an institution or a selection committee or whatever, to demonstrate that you have found the right person, because we know that that woman's out there.
Thank you. Very, very constructive and comprehensive, Jocelyn. Are there any other comments, or should I hand back to our panelists while we are waiting? Yeah, please go ahead, Flavia.
Thank you so much. And in the meantime, I also wanted to acknowledge that Nina Sharbe has joined us, and we want to give you a big round of applause now that she has come together with Susanna, because they helped us put together all the data. Thank you, Nina, and please chip in into, because Nina did firsthand the interviews, so she has the voices and all the together with Susanna. I want to be a bit concrete, Joy, because like you, Jocelyn, I also feel like, okay, we decided to do the spotlight on health last year, and then this year, the geopolitics changed completely on us. So we felt like, should we still put it out? And we said yes, even more so, because as you say, data is always helpful, keeps the picture complete, and you can paint that picture. But if we look at, for example, this organization we are sitting in, the World Health Organization, very simple change of the rules for election would make sure that there is a completely different field. Like Helen, you said that Ban Ki-moon never accepted a proposal coming forward for a leader in UNDP, UNICEF, UNFPA that didn't have in the list a woman. This organization still accepts that a proposal for regional director of the Africa region has only 4 names, and they are all 4 men. To me, a very simple thing that this organization could do is to include some rules that says in the list that member states entertain for the leadership of an elected position, there should be a diversity. Maybe we should say it should be a parity, I don't know, but there should be a diversity, because otherwise I can see that the wind that we're facing will have a backlash, that maybe instead, once, maybe in 10 years' time, we redo the analysis, instead of seeing progress, maybe we see regression, which would be even unconscionable. So this is one suggestion that I like to play for the ears of the member states, for the ears of the alliances that work with member states, and see how could we, it's not a major change in rule of procedure or anything, it doesn't support anyone, it just is allowing for women to be seen in the list, and I'm sure we'll have repercussion on the women that can put themselves forward.
I think that would be a critical change, Flavia. I mean, I think of the Western Pacific regions, never had a woman leader. In fact, it proved quite hard to break the duopoly of it going between Japan and Korea, let alone women. So, no, that would be something member states presumably could insist on, that they have diversity in the selection. I wonder, Joy, if Nina, you did the interviews, whether you want to bring some sort of, context and flavour of those discussions you had with women.
There was just one thing I wanted to say. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to read the report and provide feedback. I just want to provide one thing that was extremely funny, and it's this data point about a woman named Janet de Merode, who was the head global director of the Health, Population, and Nutrition Department at the World Bank. And we put it in the report, and people were like, no, she wasn't. And we went back and we interviewed people. I called people who worked at the bank at that time. I was like, no, we don't really remember her. We think it was, we remember Tony, and then it was Richard. And we went back and back and back, and we found documents that have her name with her signature on it. And people were like, no, must be wrong. So that I think encapsulates a lot of kind of what we heard. But again, it was inspiring to hear people who continue to fight the fight even with the challenges that they face. Susanna, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it has been a really, really wonderful opportunity to speak to people, to speak to these women and hear their lived experiences. Long and hard journey they done to get to the top, very top. I think what was quite interesting was that it was really, your question was excellent about what was the role of men. Quite many said that it has been extremely important at the workplaces to have those allies who support them, they supervises who promote them, but also at homes. Because the household work, the double burden of household work is such a huge burden for women. And that also was quite interesting that these women, the fact that they had to be at home as mothers, as caregivers, as parents, that sort of hindered them from the informal networks. Like they weren't able to go to bars after work. And that's where you network, that's where you make the decisions, that's how you get to know each other, and that's usually men. So those informal networks, so it's not only about the workplace and organizations, what happens inside, but it's also what happens outside. Organizational policies, yes, I think throughout the interviews, throughout the policy review, we found that that's absolutely interesting. That's the sort of minimum standard and the blueprint, but then you need reinforcement. And there comes in the organizational culture change, and that's more harder to achieve and to do. One thing that I think also was quite interesting was the notion that quite across the board, through these interviews, women said that they got an opportunity to become a leader, to become a director when things were really hard, when they're sort of the organization was like struggling with financial resources or or the political hurdles, or there were staff conflicts, and that's when they were asked to lead. And I think that was quite, and actually that's quite interesting listening this week, the WHO financing crisis, and also the whole politics, what is happening in the world. I guess that means only one thing and indicates that the next DG must be a woman, or even the Secretary General, given the world politics.
Thank you very much. I think, Rajat, you wanted to make a comment?
Thank you, Joy. Two quick points. One is actually picking up from where, Susanna, you just left. I think within the present context that we are talking about, where there is so much focus that is happening and starting to emerge in terms of the fiscal crisis and how we address the fiscal crisis and move forward, there is a real risk of deprioritization of certain agendas. I would bet you my last penny, if you heard the word gender in Committee A discussions in the week that it has been. And that is likely to get worse, not just because of how things are happening, but how priorities are being determined. And even within the new organogram that we are now with, the entire agenda is now squeezed into one tiny box in one division. So we have to be very vigilant on what we are talking about and how this agenda will indeed survive. Having said that, and something that we at the partnership have now started paying more attention and doing more of is coalition building. And that the only way we are able to stem the decline that we are having is by building stronger partnerships and coalitions, not just with those who agree with us, but across sectors that we are not in. You would be gobsmacked if you actually go now and see how these anti-DEI measures are being implemented in trade negotiations down the road at WTO. We have no idea how to even engage there. So we do need some broader cross-sectoral alliances to get to where we need to, because otherwise this is going to unfortunately become an agenda that is invisibilized and then forgotten. The final bit I wanted to say is, allyship is a very interesting word, and I do hope that one can be, but I think within that, far too often the emphasis is put on women leaning in and finding allies rather than men leaning out and doing what is required. And I don't think we can get away with it. And I think this is what, Jocelyn, you were asking us to do that without ensuring clear accountability to what is required. I think we need to have it more concretized in our thinking so we get where we need to.
Thank you, Rajat. I think you wanted to speak. Maybe you could come.
My name is Helen.
Okay.
Come to the floor that we have people online.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm an obstetrician and a maternal health inspector here with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Scientists in the UK. I just wanted to, I guess, make a point about parental leave, because I think that's an area where institutions could really lead by example and make a big difference. So where I come from in the UK, we now have shared parental leave, but what that means in practice is a woman still has to sort of donate her share to her partner, and culturally that's still not something that has been taken up. And so it sets up a situation that already by the time the woman is returning to work after 6 months or a year of maternity leave, you've set up this unequal situation and she's doing the lion's share of the caregiving. And so I think that compared to, say, policies in Scandinavia where there's specified paternity leave, and if in this case, father doesn't use that, it goes. And I think that it would be great to see international institutions leading by example and implementing those kind of policies in the hope that then it would trickle down to the rest. So I think that's something that could make a big difference.
Thank you. Positive incentive. Yes, Helen.
Yes, just a point. I mean, this is probably the worst time to be raising this issue, but UN staff have historically had quite generous education grants for their kids, but that has never extended to early childhood education. And what one found living in the New York environment was that it was often very difficult for young parents, for both of them to be at the UN, because the childcare costs in New York are just absolutely horrific. I mean, I've come from a country where we do tremendous subsidisation and come off the back of the free kindergarten movement, and obviously Scandinavia has great provision as well. But in New York, it cost you, well, when I was there, even people are talking $30,000 a year for early childhood education, which is quite a lot out of an after-tax salary, So I think that's something that could also be pushed for. But as I say, the money side of it now is not so great. But we would find young women from diplomatic missions who would be quite interested in coming to positions, but just said, well, the mission's paying me a childcare allowance. I can't afford to come to you, because it's just too costly. So just a thought.
Yeah, that's great. Let's Flavia first, and then
I just wanted to pick up on this comment you made, because when I was working here in the World Health Organization as Assistant Director General, I also, Dr. Chan, she asked me to be the lead for gender mainstreaming, and we created an entity that was called Mainstreaming Gender Equity and Rights. And one of the things we did was to look at what are the rights that female workers in the World Health Organization have. And to our surprise, we had a policy that indicated that women had maternity leave only for 4 months, not even allowing the 6 months that the organization says that you have to have exclusive breastfeeding. You are a gynecologist, so you're smiling, you know that that has been the mantra of the organization for decades. And yet in its own workforce, it wasn't. And there was nothing for paternal leave. And I can tell you the difficulty to change. So it was such a painful process that took us longer than 1 year, with the staff association that was a tremendous ally, with, at the time, an assistant director general from Sweden, Dr. Ranströsen, who was the male ally that helped us. And finally, we landed with a policy which I believe is still the current, which is 6 months maternal leave and 1 month paternal leave. But that was the maximum that we could do. They all to say that I think there has to be the demand from civil society organization and for organizations that work in health. There has to be the demand that these organizations lead by example, because they don't. And we have to have that pressure to hold the organizations accountable. They do not lead by example having leadership that is gender diverse. They do not lead by example offering policies that are for workers. So we have to demand it. That's my point, Joy.
Revati?
Yeah, so thank you for raising that point as well. So I mean, previous to this role, I was with Save the Children, and I'm proud to say that it was last year that, Save the Children was able to implement this for our own staff, because we had 110 country offices and they were governed by different, rules, local rules. But for Save staff, we managed to advocate for years, and last year we managed to get that. So it's a tough conversation. And I'd like to actually respond to your comment, about these networks. And as you mentioned, I think that, of course, formal and informal networks, but at all levels, because if you want that many numbers to come up to that level, to be considered for these positions, then you need them at every level. Because in some places it's about raising the ceilings, and in some places it's about smashing them. So getting that thing, and I would even be provocative enough to say and advocate for mixed networks. That if you do want to educate both young men and women to appreciate the principles of feminist leadership, then probably having mixed networks, where you're training both the men and the women in getting them. Yeah.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Joy. Really inspired by the discussions today. Thank you, and the data in the report. And I'm thinking, how do we speak to the next generation to build sort of a will for those women, the future women leaders? I'm the proud father of a young girl that's 5 years old, and I'm mesmerized by the way people speak differently to my boy than to my daughter. So it's always, oh, you've got such a nice dress and nice hair, etc. While they praise, my son's dynamism, for instance, or sports abilities, right? So it's even within the family. So I think there are a lot of unconscious biases that we need to unpack and address. And it brings me to my point about really kind of a beacon of hope, of bringing hope to this discussion. I'm thinking back a couple of years when they announced that Rwanda was the first country in the world to have a majority of female parliamentarians. Fantastic milestone. Our colleague from Spain had to leave, but they are leading a network of decision makers putting forward a feminist foreign policy, and Canada is part of that network. So I guess that's a question for you, Flavia, and for the network, is how do we move the needle towards solutions so that we don't just admire the problem, but we really inspire hope for ourselves, but also for the next generation. I hope that, my daughter can become the next female Secretary General, the first female Secretary General, but I hope not, because she's only 5, right? So how do we inspire hope? How do we document good practices that are going to help us move the needle forward?
Joy, just a point to make. I'm going to sound like Jocelyn and say I want to make a negative point first, but you got another one too. Okay, so isn't all the survey evidence now suggesting that the world has a problem with young men and toxic masculinity? It's probably the point you were going to make. And I know the surveys done amongst other places in Australia and New Zealand, which showed young men were much more likely to think Trump was the bee's knees. Yes. Young women couldn't stand it, but there is a toxic masculinity, and it's partly, of course, amplified by social media, but we do have a challenge with young men. So it may be that, just as we mobilise for women, for your daughter's generation, we've got young men coming up through the ranks who are not going to be very helpful. So maybe a little bit of strategising about that. I can see Jocelyn's itching to get into this.
Please go ahead, Jocelyn.
I've written quite a lot about this recently, about this growing gender divide in younger generations, young women across the world becoming more progressive, young men becoming more conservative. So that's going to threaten all of this warm glow in here. But actually, of course this is negative, but this is serious, which is, forgive me for using your wonderful comments as a bit of a way to problematize a broader issue, which is gender pay gaps, because actually the evidence shows that whilst there was a predominance of women in the Rwandan cabinet for a period of time, there is a gender balanced cabinet, again just announced in my native country, Canada, that as professions or occupations feminize, the work becomes devalued, and women, even if they become represented in equal proportions to men, are paid less. And it's obviously one dimension of this issue that we haven't had time today to discuss, but it's extremely serious and shows the deep structural and cultural gender bias that exists. You said it beautifully, Rajat, misogyny, sexism, and the capitalist patriarchy. So that's kind of what we're up against. Women's work becomes devalued as women ascend within occupations. So for those of us who work in medicine or health, it's very familiar: pediatrics, family medicine, physiotherapy, nursing are those classical examples of occupational segregation, which is not about different levels of productivity or capability, but is about how women's work is devalued. And I've got a paper coming out. It's been accepted, and it's not in my own journal, so I'm getting no. The joke is that I'm getting a taste of my own medicine, which is I'm an author. I've submitted a paper on the gender pay gap that I personally find staggering. So I hope that you'll keep your eye out for it. I won't say any more. But it's been accepted, and I've been waiting for now over a month, and I'm absolutely so frustrated with the journal. So now I know what it's like to be an author. That's probably good for me, but very humbling. But I really do want to just emphasize that issue about the gender pay gap, because it is that sort of broader context that kind of envelops a lot of this. And there are very few sectors or geographies in the world where women are not paid less for the same work, and that's deeply, deeply unfair, and obviously is about bias, not about any other factor.
Okay.
Often I think we celebrate gains, and they can be very easily taken away. I'll give you 2 examples from New Zealand where we have a Trump-style government. The gap in their budget was just filled by changing the law on pay equity settlements, and they invalidated 33 major claims for pay equity between occupations to release billions of dollars. So women's wages went by the by. The second thing that was reported, and I haven't had time to look at the details of the budget, which was today in New Zealand, but it was also reported that a gain for women, which had been made in the courts on income compensation for women who are victims of sexual violence, rape, they were also going to drop legislation to invalidate that. So just, we often think, gosh, that's a milestone. What a great court decision. What a great sort of pay equity move forward. And then they're short of money. What goes on the chopping block first? The gains for women. And I'm sure that mine is not the only country that's experiencing this.
Yeah, if you can make one comment, Flavia, and then we'll go to your concluding comments, the panelists' concluding comments.
I just wanted to pick up the question that Etienne asked. What are we doing to try and encourage the new generation? And the group GWL has a small initiative. Maybe, Andrea, you can also explain a little bit more. We call it It Is Her Turn. It's a small exchange between some of the senior leaders like Helen and others that have been in position of leadership and some of the students that are studying to become, that are aspiring to enter the workforce, to just give the vision and the possibility you can do that, even in the current scenario where it may seem so challenging, even when the current wind is the case. And we are finding that there is a tremendous enthusiasm. We have done that at Science Po most recently with one of the members, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain. Actually, I should have mentioned while he was here. And there is really a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. I wonder whether we should also look at having, normally the participation is primarily female, young students, but I wonder if we should not really tackle also young men, because that's what we are seeing survey by survey, the attitude that is changing, that is so important. Back to you, Joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Flavia. I really we need to wrap up. But by wrapping up, I'm going to start with Katherine. Yes. So that I'll give you 3 minutes to give you your concluding sort of remarks. What are we taking away from here, and what would you consider to be the best next steps?
So no worries. So there's a lot of things, and I think in 3 minutes we cannot wrap it up. But I even have questions. So I have a lot of questions. So. We have, it's always interesting to see that every time we talk about women leadership, the maternity aspect comes in that. Unfortunately, it should not be a roadblock in terms of for women to be in leadership positions, right? But one thing that is important to see, we see for example, at the country level, there is already a lot of policy in place, a lot of guidelines, a lot of instruments, legal instruments. But I think one of the things as the next step to analyze is what are the organizational structure and operational roadblocks that we are seeing at the national, regional, and at the institutional level, especially in multilateral organizations. I mean, it was mentioned about, we have seen it, there was an election of the African region, and unfortunately, I mean, the flyer doesn't do justice. Why is that? If there is something that it has to be done within WHO in terms of that, then we have to advocate with member states to change that. There's a lot of things in terms of governance structures that member states should be pushing within WHO itself, I will say. But I will go back to what I said. I think one of the next steps that we have to see is how women ourselves, we mentor each other, how we network in a way that to position and to support each other. And that being said, something that you mentioned, women's at all levels, women's at all age, and I will say women's from all regions. That is something important to do, and then look into the operational structures of organization. I think that will be my takeaway. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And what would be your takeaway, Revati, from this?
Yeah, I think I will leave with a lot of hope, that there are a lot of people who are talking about it, and yes, progress is being made, but accelerating is something I would advocate for. And from the other message I would have is, the reset of the mindset that we really need, because it will require attacking it from all sides. No single approach or solution or group of people are going to be able to address this. So.
That was a very brief one. So it gives more time to our leadership this side. So what about you, Rajat?
Thanks, Joy. I think a lot to say and unpack, and thank you. Really, that was an important conversation, and I'm really appreciative of GWL Voices to getting us here. So really big thank you for the report, Nina. Well done to the team for one another. But I think there are lots of things. Starting by saying we need to talk to our boys. Because the world has an Andrew Tate problem, and I'm generalizing, and the way it is being caricatured is even boys from educated families damning feminist ideology and values. I think that says a lot in our friend circles, in our relationships, and I think we need to start calling it out and addressing what is happening here, because we can teach our girls as much as we want. I have a 12-year-old as well. I think we have to talk to our boys and get them to see the difference between toxic masculinity and respecting women and gender. I think that's my starting point. The second thing I want to say is that this work does not happen on an island in and of itself. It's not a separate project to run. It's about everything we do. And it has to be looked at it as the core of our business, not just a tick box that was done because we achieved, a 50-50 parity or whatever. And just to end by saying, Joy, I think something that came out I think tacitly through the conversation, and everybody brought it out in one way or the other. We are in troubled times. We are in challenging times. This is not going to be easy, and probably going to take the best of all of us to just get through this. But what is important is to keep our values together. I think we need to put that as the non-negotiable from which we start, because if we start making gender as a transactional conversation, we lose everything by the end of it. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Flavia?
Thank you so much. I think for me, I am more and more convinced of what we said, that we need to organize politically. I mean, the fact that you are invited here, that we are convening here, is the beginning of a movement. Incidentally, I didn't say at the beginning, but we also had invited Magda Robalo, the interim executive director of Women in Global Health. She could not be with us. I know there are some other colleagues. I'm meeting with them this evening at the meet and greet. So there are other groups that are looking at this, and we need to really organize. So what I like to please share the information, the data. The report doesn't even have a name, an author, is public property. Anyone can use it. Organize, see where there are people that can help, because I think and then we need to look at the calendars of when these leadership opportunity come up and have the eye on those, because this is how we can probably change a needle, at least in the midterm. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Helen, please.
Well, I think Flavia's idea around the regional health WHO directors, there being a field that must include women, is a good one, and we should encourage friendly member states to be raising this. The other thing that has been touched on slightly is perhaps the importance of intergenerational dialogue, particularly for younger women, because as I say, the same old barriers are there in different forms, and those who've played a part in trying to knock them over, we do have some hints and tips on this, but I think the point's also been made that we need to involve young men in these dialogues too, because we are worried about the trends among young men and the influences that they're subjected to at the moment.
Thank you.
All right. It looks like I hurried everybody for nothing because I thought the panelists were going to take at least 3 to 4 minutes each summarizing, but they haven't. But I feel that the message is quite clear. We still have a lot of work to do, but we have a lot of work to do because we need to integrate this into everything. It needs to be our bread and butter. We shouldn't say tomorrow I'll say something that is gender related or something that will actually promote leadership of women or the girl child. We must know that everything that we do does. You know, I'm a grandmother, and my son has got twins, a boy and a girl. And it's alarming to see how differently the two of them are treated. The girl is more pampered, and she plays with dolls houses, interested in fashion and how she looks. The boy is macho. He's told to protect his sister, and he plays with cars and aeroplanes, and so we are teaching them from that age. And we say and the boy is told, what type of man are you? You shouldn't be crying. Whereas the girl, she cries, oh, okay, baby, it's okay, don't cry. So we are teaching the boy from that age that he is in charge, that he must be strong, that he's the one who is going to dictate what happens. And so it is not surprising in Botswana and in Southern Africa as a whole, gender-based violence is on the rise, and it's on the rise amongst the youth. It is not the elderly people, it's not my husband's age group or my age group. No, it is our children and their children that are perpetrating the violence. And the femicide, they're killing their children as well, in order to stop the partner from getting custody of the children. He would rather kill her and kill the children. It's very common now. So this is where we are. We have gone beyond just leadership, but to dominance. So the situation, I feel, is much more dangerous than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. So we must be doing something wrong. And I really appreciated what you said, Revati, when you say it has to be mindset change. It has to be the change of culture. It has to be changing of the way we do things. It's not just a question of lobbying for women and negotiating a position for women, but it's a question of sitting at the table, bringing to the table both the men and the women, the boy child and the girl child, and teaching them. As we are teaching the men that the boy child that women are equal, the girl child must also be taught to also not to be submissive, and that she must drive that car, she must fly that aeroplane, that she must be the president. So I really feel that perhaps the situation is more challenging for us than it was before. I become so worried when I hear you, Helen, saying that in your country, which we thought was extremely progressive, that they're still able to reverse the laws. I mean, something is drastically wrong. Something is very wrong. It means whatever we've been doing is actually not changing the culture. And somehow the misogyny, the sexism, the patriarchy is still so deeply entrenched. So we have to focus on uprooting it. And one other line which I liked was we shouldn't look at raising the ceiling, but we must smash it. I thought that was really good. But at the same time, we mustn't think about there was a question about the paternity versus maternity leave. And we mustn't be satisfied with half measures. We must go for 50-50 We should not be saying, okay, 30% representation is enough, 20% is better than nothing. In order for us to actually fully change the mindset and create a new reality, anything else that is not equity should be unacceptable. But thank you so much, and I really want to give the Women in Global Health Leadership kudos and kudos and kudos for producing this, but also for sharing this with us and for opening it up so that we can use it. I'll definitely use it in Southern Africa. I think every National Gender Commission in Southern Africa is going to get a copy of this, and I believe that we will get there. But in order to get there, we must get there together with the man, with the boy child, with the girl child. And thank you so much for this. And hopefully next year we'll have some good news, Helen. Maybe we'll have a UN Secretary General that is obviously going to be elected. Yeah. Thank you.